Thanks, Minister Frydenberg. Elizabeth Lewis-Gray, Chair, Mets Ignited Growth Centre. In the Mets industry, 19% of the industry are manufacturers, and that's a $16 billion proportion of our industry, and 21% of that industry exports. So obviously my constituency are worried about their competitiveness to be able to manufacture and export and be competitive globally. What can I say to them about, what the future in energy pricing is going to look like for them? A lot of them are in Victoria, a lot of them in Western Australia, so perhaps not so bad over there, a lot in New South Wales and Queensland. So what do I say about the future for them in pricing?
I think the export controls we've introduced in the gas space will actually, it's already having an effect, but it will continue to have a very important effect. So, for example, since the Prime Minister called in the major LNG exporters, we saw Engie and Origin reach an agreement to restart Pelican Point in South Australia, which had been mothballed as a gas-fired power plant, which is important. I think it's about 240 megawatts, so it's not insignificant. We've also seen some deals being struck, but once we're able to secure more gas for the domestic market, I think that will have a very important effect on gas prices and therefore electricity prices. I think, and this is where the Finkel review comes in, I think if we can land some sort of position to create that signal for investment in a broad suite of generation capacity. Obviously the momentum is there with renewables and that needs to continue, but also for thermal generation. I think that will be very important in restoring confidence. One other area which is very important to pricing of electricity relates to the network costs. Network costs are poles and wires, and they went up between 2007 and 2013 by about 100%. And this process of the poles and wires increasing their recoup from the consumers is determined by the Australian Energy Regulator. Now, the Australian Energy Regulator makes a determination, but that decision can be appealed, as it has been numerous times, by the networks in the form of what is called limited merits review to the Australian Competition Tribunal and after that to the Federal Court. Last week, the Federal Court ruled that the networks were able to get an extra $3 billion off consumers in New South Wales over the 5-year period 2014 to 19. It goes back to 2014. $3 billion more than the AER. I have said as the Commonwealth Minister, I don't want to see limited merits review. You don't have it in the telco sector. You don't have it in the water sector, the air services sector for Australia Post. I was supported at the COAG meeting by the South Australian and Victorian governments, but I was not supported by the Queensland and New South Wales governments because they're conflicted. They own either all or some of these networks, so they want to pocket the extra money that they get from this limited merits review process at the expense of consumers. So I'm looking to drive some significant reform to that through the COAG meeting, and the next meeting of the Energy Ministers, the formal one, is July. And that, I think, will make some changes to the network prices. And bearing in mind that distribution and transmission make up 50% of the bill on electricity, generation's 30%, retail's about 12, 13, and the other is green schemes, the other 8%. So that's how you make up a bill. I think that will be quite significant. But if we can get certainty, more investment in generation, lower gas prices, and fix up the limited merits review process, then I think that will help in the medium to long term. Short, medium and long term.
Thank you. I think we've got another question over here. Thank you.
Hi, David Alexander from Barton Deakin. I'm just interested in the fact that Donald Trump has said that coming up over the next week or so, he's going to make a declaration on whether the US will withdraw from the Paris Accords. There's some speculation in the US media that he's made up his mind and he is going to withdraw. We don't know that yet, but it would seem to me to be a very significant adverse development if Trump were to declare that America was to become a free rider on the rest of the world's efforts on climate change. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, let me divide that, David, into two parts. We've made it very clear that what the United States does for its domestic policy on the climate change and Paris targets will be a matter for them and the Trump administration. So let's not preempt what they decide. I do note, though, that the energy intensity of the US economy is now at its lowest levels, I think, since 1995. So in more than 20 years, it's at its lowest energy emissions intensity of the economy. So it's moving in the right direction. More than 190 countries signed up to Paris, and it's been ratified by more than 140 countries. And Australia, and this is the second part, takes our obligations to agreements we sign up and ratify very seriously. And I was in the US just recently, and I met with Rick Perry, and I met with Scott Pruitt, the EPA head, and Rick Perry is the Energy Secretary in the Trump administration. And my comments in the US privately are the same as my comments publicly, which is Australia has commitments and we're sticking to those. And I think we can meet our targets, and I think we're making good progress in doing so. So the US, we'll see what happens. Let's just wait and see. But from the Australian economy's perspective, we're the lowest emissions intensity in 27 years, both in a per capita and GDP basis here in Australia. We've got our targets and we're setting about trying to meet them.
Thank you. We've got a question over here, which will be our last question.
Melanie Robertson from Committee for Ballarat. We certainly understand that we're in unprecedented territory with the energy reforms that are happening, and the energy sector is certainly undergoing significant transformation. And in regional Victoria, certainly we're trying to position ourselves to take full advantage of the economic prosperity that's also associated with this transformational process that's occurring. And on a positive note, I'd really like to hear what you believe are actually the opportunities that exist, particularly in regional areas of Australia, with a new energy system or transformation of our energy system going forward.
Yeah. Well, a big beneficiary of the advance in renewables has been regional Australia, because obviously the large-scale solar farms and wind farms have been built in regional Australia, and that creates jobs and investment. We're also seeing smart grids in regional Australia being very effective. Mines in regional Australia, there's a mine called the DeGrussa mine. It's a copper mine. It's seen millions of diesel displaced by having a combination now of solar and diesel. So I think whether it's operational mines or, dare I say it, even disused mines like the Kidston one in Queensland, which is being looked at now for pumped hydro, and pumped hydro is putting water in two reservoirs, one at the top of the hill, one at the bottom, and simple technology. When the water comes down the hill, it generates power. It goes through a turbine, and then when the power is cheap, so in the middle of the night, you pump it up the hill, about 80% efficiency. It's like a big battery, and then you send it down when you need it most. We're using old mine sites where there's an elevation that's necessary for that pumped hydro. So I think regional Australia can see really good opportunities there. So I see it in smart grids, I see it in renewables, and let's face it, in places like Latrobe Valley, who have had an uncertain future because of the closure of Hazelwood, we need to think about mine life for the coal-fired power stations because not only is that important to grid stability, it's also important for jobs. And the CCS announcement will be useful not just for industrial processes but also for thermal generation. And I note that the Committee for Gippsland strongly welcomed our announcement in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And I think from the audience, I'd like you to show your normal way of appreciating the Minister's session and his response.